Hello everybody. I am here to tell you about Chapter 1, or I guess it's Chapter 2 in the other edition, First Language Acquisition, as well as Chapter, whatever number it is, English Morphology. Excuse the pajamas, it's about bedtime. I realize the only webcam that I really own is my cell phone, so I can't have it propped up against here, so hopefully you can see this okay. But starting with First Language Acquisition, it got into the first thing that kind of jumped out to me was 3 aspects of language development, which in order are us learning language, then learning through language, and then learning about language, which I kind of thought of as like learning language, young children, learning through language, your K-12 or even college experience. Now that you've mastered the language, you can learn using it. And finally, you're learning about language, which is what we're doing in this class, and many other linguistics classes and the like. It was a good reminder at the beginning of the chapter. It said basically something to the effect of we're all always teaching language, even though the school may not refer to these teachers as language teachers, that's what they are. So regardless of whether you teach social studies or gym or you name it, or you're teaching language. It got into some theories about language development, starting with behaviorism, which is Skinner. You guys probably remember from Psych 101, the behaviorist theory. Basically that learning depends on the response, learning the language depends on response of the individual to their environment, which in the 57, then Chomsky comes in, Noam Chomsky comes in and says wrong. Language is more complex than that. That's overly simplistic, and kind of ushers in a different way of thinking about language acquisition, which I guess we know now as the cognitive approach or the cognitive theory of language. A nice quote from Rice. They keep referring to these people by their last names like I'm supposed to know who they are, but Rice said this: children at first draw heavily on concepts as a way to master language and later use language to learn new concepts. It made me think of the phrase, kind of like the K3 is learning to read, and then like 4 through 12 of the K-12 experience is you're reading to learn. So learn to read, and then you read to learn. Which I just kind of reminded me of some of the things that we hear at PD and whatnot. So moving on to the stages of childhood language development. The first year, basically, a kid is babbling and speaking in one-word phrases, but the cool thing about that is it can still represent really complex ideas. So like if a kid says ball, it might be I want the ball, or like I see a ball. There's more under the surface as far as meaning goes. After the first year, around 18 months, give or take, of course, kids starts talking in 2-word phrases, and they undergo pretty rapid vocabulary growth. And something I thought was cool is between, that's 18 months, but between 2 years to 3 years, scientists and linguists basically have to stop studying kids because they're growing too quickly with their language acquisition, that they're all over the board, I guess. But going back to the 18-month-ish range, the super big burst of vocab growth is apparently indicative of, well, according to most linguists, it's either indicative of an innate capability in humans or an age-enhanced ability, aka little kids are super good at language acquisition, a capacity for acquiring language, because there's apparently there's no other way to account for how good kids, 18-ish month old kids acquire vocabulary. They either have to be innately good at it, more on that in a second, or that's a special power of 18 months olds is acquiring new words. I have written Chomsky is intense. So yeah, holy shit. Noam Chomsky is I don't know, I've heard of his stuff before, but I haven't ever really studied much of his work actually as a linguist. He it goes on his theory about generative grammar and universal grammar. So generative grammar, he assumes that, because this is apparently an easy conclusion to come to when you know Chomsky, that because language is infinite, so the rules governing it must not be. Language is infinite. You can create an infinite amount of complex or not complex combinations of words. So there must be some system behind it, and that's what he goes on to do, is attempts successfully to systematize words. And he says that there's basically two levels. There's the two-level theory that he comes up with, that there's two levels of significance for language. Let me see if I can find one of the example sentences. Visiting linguists can be boring. So that either means linguists who are visiting are boring, or visiting a linguist is boring. So the point of this is, like, there's multiple, like, inferential levels that we have to make in order to make sense of a sentence. And he kind of fleshed that out in his two-level theory. Universal grammar was another thing that they talked about, especially about Chomsky. It's this innate knowledge of language that we have. That's what he calls universal grammar, is our innate knowledge of language. Humans are born not speaking Japanese or Korean or Hmong or whatever, but they are born with a set of knowledge that is common to all human languages, according to him, and that's largely supported by other linguists. So a kid doesn't